This isn't a story about a fight. Not a physical one anyway. It's a story about a single moment, a single decision that shattered a world built on cruelty and rebuilt it with something far more powerful. It all started on a Tuesday, in a classroom that looked like any other, with a girl who tried to make herself invisible, and a boy who was certain the universe revolved around him. And before we go any further, if you believe in stories where the quiet ones find their roar, you're in the right place. Subscribe and join us, because this is a journey you won't want to miss. The air in Mr. Davison's third period U.S. history class was thick with the smell of old textbooks, industrial cleaner, and the restless energy of 23 high school seniors counting down the minutes to lunch. Sunlight heavy with dust motes streamed through the large windows, illuminating the scuffed linoleum floors and the decades of graffiti carved into the wooden desks. At the back of the room, a boy named Jake Preston held court. He wasn't the captain of the football team. He wasn't coordinated enough for that, but he possessed a different kind of currency, a loud, brash confidence that bordered on aggression, and a family name that carried weight in their small, Midwestern town. His father owned a local car dealership. His uncle was the mayor. And Jake moved through the hallways of Northwood High with the unshakable belief that he was heir to a throne he'd built himself. He held his phone under the desk, not even bothering to hide it, a smirk playing on his lips as he texted, his eyes occasionally flicking up to survey his domain. The desk he'd unofficially claimed for the semester was in the corner, a prime location for observing the room without being directly in the teacher's line of sight. It was next to the window, with a perfect view of the student parking lot where his souped-up Mustang was always parked at a defiant angle. It was his spot. Everyone knew it. It wasn't assigned. It was conquered through sheer force of personality. No one had dared to challenge him for it. It's since a hapless freshman tried on the first day of school 2 years prior and was verbally eviscerated so thoroughly he transferred to a different class. The classroom door creaked open, and a hush fell, not out of respect but out of curiosity. Principal Higgins stood there, looking uncomfortable in his too tight suit, and beside him was a girl no one had ever seen before. She was of average height, with long dark hair that fell in a silken curtain down her back, and eyes the color of rich espresso that took in the room with a quiet, unnerving stillness. She held a new, unmarked binder tightly against her chest, a shield. "Mr. Davison," the principal said, his voice too loud for the quiet room. "This is Anya Sharma. She's transferring in from New Jersey." "Anya, this is Mr. Davison. He'll get you settled." Mr. Davison, a wary man in his late 50s with a kind face and tired eyes, gave a small, genuine smile. "Welcome, Anya. We're just about to start. Why don't you find a seat?" He gestured to the mostly full room. The only visibly empty desk was the one right next to Jake's throne. It was empty for a reason. Anya nodded silently, her eyes scanning the room. She could feel the weight of 46 eyes on her. She was used to this. Being the new girl was a role she'd played before, though it never got easier. She moved with a fluid grace down the aisle, her soft-soled shoes making no sound. She could feel the collective intake of breath as she approached the empty desk. A girl in the front row subtly shook her head, a silent warning. Anya either didn't see it or chose to ignore it. She slid into the chair and placed her binder neatly on the desk. The scent of her shampoo, something like jasmine and sandalwood, a stark contrast to the stale classroom air, wafted towards Jake. He looked up from his phone, his smirk dissolving into a look of pure, unadulterated annoyance. He didn't see a person, he saw an inconvenience, an obstacle, a challenge to his authority. Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with a condescension that was practiced and precise. "You're in my seat." Anya turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze for the first time. Her expression was neutral, unreadable. "The desks aren't assigned," she said, her voice quiet but clear, with no trace of the tremor she felt inside. Jake let out a short, humorless laugh, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "Yeah, they are. This one's mine. Has been all semester. Everyone knows that." He gestured vaguely around the room, and a few of his sycophants, a couple of guys who mirrored his style and attitude, nodded in agreement. "So, why don't you be a good little new girl and find somewhere else to park it?" Mr. Davison, who had been writing the day's agenda on the whiteboard, paused. He turned, his marker poised in mid-air. "Is there a problem, Jake?" Jake put on a mask of wounded innocence. No problem, Mr. D. Just letting the new girl know the seating chart. He turned back to Anya, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that was still perfectly audible to the students around them. Seriously. Anya's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Her palms were damp. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to avoid conflict, to make herself small and disappear. This was the dance of the new kid, and she knew the steps well: acquiesce, apologize, assimilate. But something hard and unyielding had formed in her chest. Maybe it was the exhaustion of starting over again. Maybe it was the way he said, "Little new girl," reducing her to nothing. She looked down at her desk, at the pristine cover of her binder, and then back at Jake. She didn't move. "I'm fine here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it echoed in the tense silence. Jake's face tightened. The challenge was public now. His credibility, the fragile ecosystem of fear and respect he cultivated, was being tested. He leaned forward, his chair slamming back onto all four legs with a sharp crack. He placed his hands on her desk, his knuckles white, and leaned in so close she could smell the mint gum on his breath. "I said," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous, "move. You don't belong here." The subtext was as clear as the hatred in his eyes. It wasn't just about the desk anymore. It was about her skin, her hair, her name. It was about the fact that she was different. The classroom was a frozen tableau. No one breathed. The clock on the wall ticked, each second stretching into an eternity. Mr. Davison took a step forward, his expression shifting from wary to stern. "Jake Preston, that is enough. Sit down and turn around." But Jake was beyond hearing. The red mist of humiliation and rage had descended. He was a cornered animal, and his only move was to attack. He snatched the binder from Anya's desk. It was a simple, blue cloth binder, but to her, it was a sanctuary, containing her carefully organized notes, her thoughts, her fragile sense of order in a chaotic world. "Give that back," Anya said, her voice gaining a sliver of steel. "Or what?" Jake sneered, holding it tauntingly out of her reach. He flipped it open. The first page was a sheet of handwritten notes in a language he didn't recognize, filled with elegant, curling script. "What's this?" "Your secret code." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He pulled out the sheet and crumpled it into a ball, tossing it onto the floor. A gasp went through the room. This had escalated from bullying to something more visceral, more violent. Anya's neutral mask finally cracked. A flicker of pain, of profound violation, crossed her face. She looked at the crumpled ball of paper on the floor. Her history, her language, her grandmother's language, treated like trash. "Jakey!" Mr. Davison's voice was a whip crack. "My desk now." But Jake wasn't finished. He was enjoying this. He was winning. He flipped through more pages, pulling out a photograph tucked into the inner pocket. It was a picture of Anya with her family. Her mother, her father, and her little brother, all smiling brightly in front of the Statue of Liberty, a relic from her old life. "Ow, look at the happy little family," he mocked, holding it up for his friends to see. "Took a long boat ride to get here, did you?" The racist jab, now explicit and undeniable, landed like a physical blow. The air was sucked from the room. Several students looked down at their desks, ashamed, unable to meet Anya's eyes. One girl, Sarah, who had tried to warn her, had tears of frustration in her eyes, but still no one moved. No one spoke. Anya slowly rose to her feet. She wasn't tall, but in that moment she seemed to tower over the seated Jake. The quiet, nervous girl was gone. In her place was someone with a terrifying, focused calm. Her eyes, which had been wide with shock, were now narrowed, burning with a cold fire. "Give me my photograph," she said. Her voice was different. It was low, resonant, and carried an authority that silenced the last of the nervous whispers. Jake, emboldened by what he perceived as a final, futile stand, grinned. "Come and get it." He held it out, and as her hand darted forward, he snatched it back, tearing the corner of the photo. The sound of the rip was like a gunshot in the silent room. That was the breaking point. Anya didn't lunge. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, her body rigid, her hands clenched at her sides. She looked from Jake's smug, triumphant face to Mr. Davison, who was now striding towards them, his face a mask of fury. Then her eyes swept across the classroom, meeting the gaze of every student who had sat by and watched. Her look was not one of pleading, but of judgment. And then she spoke, not to Jake, not to the teacher, but to the room. "My name is Anya Sharma," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. "My family moved here from Jersey City, Because my father, Dr. Rajesh Sharma, is the new chief of surgery at Northwood General Hospital. He was recruited to save lives in this town. The language you just crumpled and threw on the floor is Sanskrit. It's one of the oldest languages in the world. And I was translating the Bhagavad Gita for a comparative religion project I did at my last school, which, for the record, was the #1 ranked public high school in New Jersey. She paused, letting the information settle. The title, Chief of Surgery, landed with a particular weight. The photograph you tore is of my family visiting the Statue of Liberty. My mother is a tenured professor of economics at the State University. My little brother is in the 9th grade here. He has autism, and he's terrified to come to school because of people like you. She turned her gaze back to Jake, who was now looking less smug and more confused. The script was not going as planned. You think this desk is yours? She continued, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. You think this school is yours? You sit here in your little kingdom, built on your daddy's name and the fear of others, and you have the audacity to tell me I don't belong. You, who can't even spell potato without autocorrect. You, who just proved to everyone in this room that the only thing small about you is your character. Jake's face was turning a blotchy red. Shut up, he muttered, but the command had no power. No, I will not shut up, Anya said, her voice rising for the first time, filled with a righteous fury. You wanted my seat. You can have it. You can have this entire pathetic, tiny world you built for yourself. Because I don't need to fight you for a piece of scrap wood. My world is bigger than this classroom. My future is brighter than your past. And the only thing you've conquered today is the title of being the biggest disappointment in this room. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that was heavy, profound, and transformative. It was broken by the sound of the classroom door swinging open again. Principal Higgins stood there, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a tall, imposing man in an impeccably tailored suit, his face a granite mask of fury. It was Jake's father, Robert Preston. He had been in the school for a pre-arranged meeting with the principal about a booster club donation. He had heard everything. He had heard the racist taunts, the tearing of the photograph, and he had heard Anya's devastating, eloquent rebuttal. The color had drained from his face. The proud car dealership owner, the pillar of the community, looked at his son not with anger, but with a devastating, soul-crushing disappointment. Jake, Mr. Preston said, his voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight. Get up. We're leaving. Jakey looked like he'd been slapped. Dad, Now his father commanded, and the word left no room for argument. The entire class watched, stunned, as Jake, suddenly looking like a very small, very young boy, slowly stood up from his prized desk. He didn't look at anyone as he shuffled past his father and the principal, his head hung low, the photograph of Anya's family still clutched, forgotten in his hand. Mr. Preston turned to Anya. He looked at the crumpled paper on the floor, then back at her. He seemed to age 10 years in that moment. Young lady, he said, his voice thick with an emotion no one could quite place, shame perhaps or respect. On behalf of my family, I am so deeply sorry. He then turned to Mr. Davison and the principal. We will be discussing the consequences for this, at length. And with that, he turned and left, leaving the classroom door open behind him. The spell was broken. A slow, scattered clapping started from the back of the room, from a quiet boy who always ate lunch alone. It was picked up by Sarah, then by others, until the entire classroom, save for Jake's shocked friends, was applauding. It wasn't a loud, celebratory applause. It was something more respectful, more awe-filled. It was an acknowledgement. Mr. Davison walked over to Anya, who had sunk back into her chair, the adrenaline draining from her, leaving her trembling. He gently picked up the crumpled Sanskrit notes and smoothed them out as best he could on the desk. He then picked up the torn photograph and carefully placed it inside her binder, which he handed back to her. Are you all right, Anya? He asked softly. She looked up at him, then at the faces of her classmates, faces that now held respect and a newfound curiosity. She took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. I am now. The rest of the class period passed in a blur. The lesson on the Civil War felt trivial compared to the war that had just been fought and won in their own classroom. When the bell rang, no one rushed out. Students slowly gathered their things, casting glances at Anya, who was meticulously repairing the tear in her family photograph with a piece of clear tape from Mr. Davison's desk. As she stood to leave, Sarah approached her. "Hey," she said, offering a tentative smile. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. I'm Sarah. Do you want to sit with us at lunch?" Anya looked at Sarah, at the genuine kindness in her eyes, and for the first time that day, a real, small smile touched her lips. "I'd like that," she said. The story didn't end there. Jake Preston was suspended for a week. But the true punishment was social. The video, filmed on a phone by a student who had finally found the courage to document the truth, never made it to social media. It didn't need to. The story spread through the school like wildfire, told and retold, with Anya's words quoted verbatim. Jake returned to school a pariah. His kingdom had crumbled. His friends, seeing his fall from grace and the shifting social winds, drifted away. The boy who had ruled through fear was now feared only for the stench of his failure. He became a ghost in the hallways, a cautionary tale. Anya, however, thrived. She didn't become the most popular girl in school. That wasn't her style. But she earned a deep and abiding respect. She started a cultural awareness club with Sarah, which became one of the most well-attended clubs in the school. She tutored students in calculus and physics, her intelligence now a source of admiration, not mockery. Her brother, inspired by her courage, found a small group of friends who accepted him for who he was. The desk in the corner of Mr. Davison's room remained empty for a week. When Jake returned, he was assigned a new seat by the door, under Mr. Davison's direct supervision. No one ever officially claimed the corner desk. It became a sort of neutral territory. But often, Anya would sit there, the sunlight from the window catching her dark hair. A quiet queen who had won her throne not by force, but by the unassailable power of her character. It was a victory that resonated far beyond a single classroom. It was a reminder that the loudest voice in the room is not always the strongest, and that sometimes the greatest courage is found not in throwing a punch, but in standing your ground and speaking your truth. It was a lesson in the corrosive nature of prejudice and the redemptive power of dignity. The bully had tried to move a girl from a desk, and in doing so, had moved himself to the very margins of his own world. He had, as promised, instantly regretted it. This story, in its own small way, became a part of the school's history, a modern-day parable whispered to incoming freshmen, "Don't be a Jake." And in that quiet warning lived the enduring legacy of the new girl who refused to move. So, that was our story. A single moment that changed everything. It makes me wonder about the quiet battles being fought in classrooms and communities everywhere. It makes me think about the power of a single voice to change the atmosphere of an entire room. And it makes me want to ask you, from my heart to yours, because stories like this connect us all across this huge country. From which part of the United States are you watching this video today? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one.